So we've learned all about the basics of actually acquiring data from a table using select and from commands. But that's only part of the story because most of the databases contain thousands or even millions of records. Often we don't want to look at all that data. I know I don't. In this lesson, we're going to go over filtering with SQL. Filtering is extremely important because it allows us to narrow the data we want to retrieve. Filtering is also used when you're doing analysis to get very specific about the data you want to analyze as part of your model. After you've watched this video, you should be able to describe the basics of filtering your data, use the where clause with common operators, use the between clause, and explain the concept of a null value. All right, we have a lot to cover, so let's begin. Filtering SQL is important to understand because we have a couple of options as to where we can filter down our data and get specific. But there's some huge benefits when we're doing it directly with SQL instead of relying on the client application to do it. First of all, when we filter our data down, it will often reduce the number of records we're retrieving. Instead of just going and grabbing a whole table and pulling every column and row from it, we can get really specific about the data we want to obtain from that table. And subsequently, that reduces how much data we're pulling in from the system. Reducing the amount of data you're analyzing will of course speed up the query performance, which in turn will speed up our overall processing. It also helps when we add the filtering at the database level because this reduces the strain on the client side of the application, which will also allow it to run better. Before you go and pull a whole table into a program like R to start doing analysis, filter that data down before you even pull it means you won't have as much data to churn through when you're analyzing it. Again, we want to try and push as many filters down as possible because databases are really optimized to do this. It also then helps to make sure that we're not straining our client application and ultimately ensures we're getting the data we want and need. To do this, we use what's called the where clause. And the where clause comes after we use our select and from. You have to select your columns and then choose which table you want the columns from. And then you add where along with your column name operator value. There's a couple different operators that you could use. You could use equals, not equals, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, between, and is null. We're going to go through a couple applications and examples of each of these operators. In the first example, we're going to filter just on a single condition. For this, again, we have select our product name, our unit price, our supplier IDs, but we want to just look at the suppliers and the unit price for the product name tofu. So after the from, we're going to add where product name equals, and then we enter what we want it to equal. In this case, tofu is a string variable. So we're going to put the string in individual quotes. As you can see, the result is a single line where the product name is tofu. And then we also have the unit price and supplier ID. For that, in this example, if we had multiple records that were named tofu, we would see more rows. But in this example, we happen to just have one record, which is named tofu. So we only see the one row. Another way to do this is to filter on a single value. In the last example, we had a string, so a single condition. But maybe we want to look at products whose prices are greater than or equal to 75. So in this example, we'll take the columns that we're interested in and we'll get the data from the product tables. But this time we're going to look at the records where the unit price is greater than or equal to 75. As you can see now, we get multiple records retrieved. But if you look at the unit price, all of the records for this unit price is greater than or over a value of 75. One tip I like to do is maybe I didn't actually need the unit price in my data. I just want to filter out those records that are greater than 75. Before I run this, I didn't need to pull in the unit price as one of the columns, but what I like to do is leave it in there to include it just for a little while, just to make sure I'm really getting what I think I'm getting. When you're just starting to write queries and testing them, I would leave in some of the columns for what you're filtering on in there. But if you don't need it, then you definitely don't need to pull it in. Another way we can filter is by looking for non-matches. Maybe you don't have just a list of one product that you want to go after, such as tofu. Maybe you have a whole bunch of products, but you know that you don't want a particular single product or a couple of products. It would be easy just to say, give me everything except blank. Again, we're going to look at products and their prices from different suppliers. But for this query, we don't want to include a specific product name, Ellis Mutton. So basically, we want to pull all records except that. We'll add our operator, in this case, not equals, and then because this is a string value, we'll add those single quotes around the string we want to filter out. What's really handy though is you can filter for a range of values. This is a little bit different because it doesn't have an operator. What it does use is between and. It's still the same format, but this way we can filter in where the units in stock are between 15 and 80. And so it really rolls off the tongue in the way you write it because you're going to put the column in that you're interested in, units in stock, and then between the two numbers that you're looking for. So to do this, I just want to put between 15, and I want to make sure to include and before the next condition. Here you can see I pull in the units in stock, and you can see the result for that are all between 15 and 80. Another example we'll go through is filtering for no value. In this example, what we're doing is filtering for something that is null. It's really important again to remember the difference between nulls and zeros. A null is very different than having a price that is 0. A null means that there is actually no data in this column. If you want to look at something where you know the price is 0 or it is an empty string, then you need to type that in as your condition. If you want to look for something where there is just no information for that column, that's where you would want to simply use is null. Here we're going to use where the product name is null. Maybe we're doing some profiling of our data and we want to see, are there any records missing from this column? This is a great way just to check and see, does the column representing the product names have some type of information for every record? So for this query, I'm asking for the records that have null value of the product name. Because I get no values returned with this search, that means that all the product names have some value in them. Again, remember the difference between null and where there is actually a 0 or an empty string. All right, so in conclusion, remember the different operators that we have for this. Equals, not equals, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, along with between and is null. Remember also to always use your where clause and then feel free to get creative. This is something I really think forms the backbone of many SQL statements. For many queries, you'll have the select from, and then more often than not, you'll be filtering down with the where clause in some regard to limit the number of records returned.